So about a day and a half ago, the internet got a big bombshell coming to us from a new report from Bloomberg. A Nintendo Switch revision, or Nintendo Switch Pro, is indeed coming. Production on this system will allegedly be starting in June and is targeting a release before the holiday 2021 season, and of course many people, myself included, are excited about this. New hardware is fun, revised hardware is fun, and let's be real, the Nintendo Switch could definitely use a bit of a performance upgrade with the new system model. But one question that started stemming from this was of course software. Obviously software is what drives system sales, but would the Nintendo Switch Pro have exclusive software that will only run on this new model? Credible rumors are starting to point to a yes in this situation, and it's something I definitely want to explore and talk about because I think there are a lot of interesting implications if this is indeed the case. What's going on, guys? I'm RGT85. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and be sure to like the video. But without any further ado, let's talk about Nintendo Switch Pro exclusives and what it would actually mean for the Nintendo Switch going forward in the future. So in case for some reason you did not watch my Nintendo Switch Pro video based on the Bloomberg article, which, I mean, shame on you if you didn't watch that, you should have watched it. Let me just quickly catch you up to speed about what is going on with this. Allegedly, a new Nintendo Switch model is going into production in the month of June and will be releasing before the holiday 2021 season. This new Nintendo Switch model will have a 7-inch OLED screen on it made by Samsung, and this is capable of doing up to 720p output. Now, there's been some sort of debate over that. We go over that in the video, so if you want more information on that, make sure you check out the previous video. But the more important thing in this whole situation is the fact that Nintendo Switch Pro, or the Nintendo Switch revision, will be capable of up to 4K graphics, meaning that there are some hardware changes happening with this, and really sort of beyond that, there's probably going to be some changes to the actual look of the system itself, and as far as things like Joy-Cons are concerned. Obviously, Joy-Con drift is a very serious situation, and it's plagued me many of times, so maybe we'll see a revised Joy-Con model with this as well. But like I said, we're not here to talk about the hardware side of things, we're here to talk about the software side of things, because now it looks like the Nintendo Switch revision, or Nintendo Switch Pro, will be getting some exclusive games to it that will only run on the new Nintendo Switch model. Now this information is coming to us from Reset Era and some jackass named Nate Drake. I don't know if I've ever heard of that guy. Oh wait, that's Nate from the Spawncast? So yeah, some jackass named Nate Drake. Now, obviously, all jokes aside, Nate is the homie, and Nate is a very credible source. He's told me things off the record that I'm just like, yeah, that makes no sense. That's not going to happen. And then it ended up happening a week or two later. So when Nate says something, I do put stock into it. I've been friends with him for quite a while, and he definitely has some interesting information that more than likely will be coming true. So on this Reset Era post, Nate Drake, or Nate the Hate as we all know him around here, said the following about Nintendo Switch Pro exclusive software. There will be some select exclusives, especially from third-party partners. May not be a big number of them, but I know of at least one. So really there's two sides of the coin in that statement. There's obviously the Nintendo side of things and there's the third-party side of things. He doesn't say that Nintendo is going to do exclusives for it, but he doesn't necessarily write that off either. He just says that it's more of a focus on third-party companies. So I want to explore both sides of that, and we're going to start out with the third-party company situation. Now, as far as revised Nintendo hardware is concerned, realistically, the last thing that we saw was the new 3DS lineup of systems that, of course, revised the 3DS. It had better 3D tracking, it had a little bit more horsepower under the engine, it had the second analog nub as well. A really great system in my opinion, and I really enjoyed this system. When it comes to third parties and the new 3DS system, we only saw really two games that were utilizing this new additional power that were only running on this new 3DS, and that was The Binding of Isaac, but more importantly, Minecraft on the Nintendo 3DS. Now this game was exclusive for new 3DS owners only, so you had to have this new system in order to play Minecraft on your 3DS system. Now, was that a good gamble? Was that a smart decision? You have to look at various factors in this, because if the power isn't there, you don't want to put out a half-assed port of the game, and Minecraft on the new 3DS did run very, very well, all things considered. Will it have ran on the 3DS in some sort of capacity? Did it really need the new 3DS? I guess that's up to the developers, but the developers felt that the only way to get Minecraft on the 3DS was to utilize the additional power of the new 3DS. So it's not something that we haven't seen before. Now, really, when you look at the Nintendo Switch, there are third-party games that obviously developers want to put on the system, but sometimes they just can't. When you look at games that saw cloud-only releases in Japan, such as Resident Evil 7 and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, or more recently, games like Control and, of course, Hitman 3, these games were capable of running on the Switch in some way, shape, or form, but the developers felt that the cloud version of the game was a better way to ensure that things like graphical fidelity was still kept intact and they wouldn't have to worry about the Switch hardware. So if third-party companies are obviously interested in putting their games on the Nintendo Switch, but they're somewhat restricted by the power of the system, it really sort of opens the door for two different possibilities. You could do things like develop games exclusively for this new Nintendo Switch model, but you could also release a cloud version for the standard Nintendo Switch model, so that way everyone sort of gets in the action. Obviously, new Nintendo Switch sales are not going to look like the standard Nintendo Switch model, which has sold over 80 million systems, but you still have that branding of the Nintendo Switch that will make it very attractive for third-party companies to want to put their games on the system. There is one thing I do have to question though going into all of this, and that is the fact that cartridge sizes are still limited as to what you could do on the Nintendo Switch. Even if they introduce the 64 gig cartridge as a standard cartridge that third-party developers can use, a lot of these games are way over 64 gigs, and I don't see third-party developers wanting to sort of clamp down and compress their files, because that's just additional work to put it on the system. So will we see more games like the NBA 2K series where you have to download a sizable chunk of the game onto an SD card, but it still runs natively on this new Nintendo Switch? I think it's a very interesting decision. It's obviously something third-party companies are going to have to look at from many different facets to decide whether or not they want to bring their game exclusively to the Nintendo Switch Pro, or they want to do a cloud version on the standard Nintendo Switch system. But I guess more options isn't a bad thing to have. If anything, it's a good thing to have because it gives you more flexibility. But then, of course, you have to look at the other side of this equation, and that, of course, is Nintendo themselves. Now, once again, going back to the new 3DS system, Nintendo only released one exclusive game on that system, and that was, of course, Xenoblade Chronicles 3D, a port of the Wii game that was brought over to the new 3DS to sort of show off the capability of this system. But Nintendo never really followed up with that. They never did anything that would sort of be exclusive to the new 3DS, besides things on the Virtual Console side of things. On the Virtual Console on the new 3DS, you then had access to Super Nintendo games, which you did not have access to on the standard 3DS. Now, Virtual Console stuff, obviously that's a moot point when it comes to the Nintendo Switch. I feel like all of the consoles that they want to put on the Nintendo Switch will run on a standard Nintendo Switch or a Switch Pro, no matter the model, even a Switch Lite. So I don't think that's really a sort of piece of this equation, but you do have to sort of look at Xenoblade Chronicles 3D and why Nintendo only did one release on the new 3DS that was exclusive to the new 3DS. And I think once again that sort of boils down to the fact that you are limiting your user base when you make a game exclusively designed for the system. So what is Nintendo going to do in this situation? I really can't imagine them doing any sort of big projects that are exclusive to the new Nintendo Switch model. It just doesn't make sense from a business standpoint because you're alienating a large chunk of your consumer base. Yes, you want them to have a reason to buy this revised Switch model, but I definitely feel like we're going to see more games enhanced on the new Nintendo Switch, more so than designed with the new Nintendo Switch exclusivity in mind. When you look at games on the 3DS, there was games like Monster Hunter, games like, of course, Hyrule Warriors Legends that just ran so much better on the new 3DS. It allowed for better visuals, it allowed for better frame rates, and I think that's going to be Nintendo's focus going into the future with this revised system. I think they could release maybe a smaller game on the eShop that is exclusive to the new Nintendo Switch model, but I don't think a big project is going to be seen in this because it just doesn't make sense. It's not really within Nintendo's business model to alienate a large consumer base when it comes to your hardware. And of course, when you look at some first-party Nintendo games that have released recently, the Nintendo Switch is starting to feel the strain. Like I said in my Switch Pro video from the other day, games like Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury. The Bowser's Fury section of the game only ran at 30 frames per second when in handheld mode. Looking at games like Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, it had frame rate drops all over the place. So I think Nintendo realizes that introducing a new system into the ecosphere for the Nintendo Switch would allow games like that to benefit, because if Nintendo's already sort of reaching the limitations of their system in-house already, how are you going to last another 4 years? So I think Nintendo Switch enhanced first-party games will be the standard going forward, but I do not think that Nintendo is going to go all in the exclusivity stuff. Maybe an eShop game, like I said, but as far as going all in like third-party companies might, I just don't really see it happening. All in all though, it's a very interesting topic to think about, because it's not without merit, because like I said, Nintendo has done this before with the 3DS and the new 3DS systems. So obviously they have some sort of a background when it goes into this. Now, how far will they expand with exclusivity on this Switch Pro? I don't think they'll go very far. I think when it comes to third parties though, they will sort of explore this a bit more, because it obviously allows them to put more taxing games on the Nintendo Switch, and maybe games that they've wanted to put on the Switch but just haven't had the chance to because of the technical limitations of the system and having to downgrade stuff. But what do you think about this situation? Do you think there are going to be exclusive titles for the new Nintendo Switch revision, or do you think that companies will just sort of utilize this additional power to make current games and games in the future just run a little bit better on the system, which I think will be mostly the standard going forward? Let me know in the comments section down below. And as always guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Check out other videos on the channel as well, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Later.